A Course in
What?
with Cynthia Morgan.
Hey, course friends, welcome to A Course in What? I'm Cynthia Morgan, and this is a podcast in which I read and discuss the text of A Course in Miracles. And welcome to podcast episode number 45. So, you may recall, if you've been following along with this podcast, that I had asked you listeners, for some of you to write in if you felt moved to do so, about how you found A Course in Miracles and where you're at with it now, kind of your journey with A Course in Miracles. And we've had a few people write in, which is really nice. And I'm going to read one today that is from a guy who is one of our listeners. So he says, in 2012, I had a lot of things that on the outside would seem to make a person very happy. I had a house I owned and owned at a discount and had just moved into. I had a smoking hot boyfriend, youth, a job that gave me plenty of disposable income, good health, good friends, and so on. And in the late summer of that year, I realized how little any of that truly matters. It started when my aforementioned smoking hot boyfriend dumped me because of repeated selfish acts I was engaging in. I was sad that I'd been dumped and began feeding my mind a bunch of emotional candy in fantasy form. I'd get him back. I'd make him regret getting rid of me. You don't get rid of someone as great as me, after all. Desperate for a way to win back my lost love, I was listening to the radio and found that one of my favorite athletes was starting a new 40-day fitness program. Here it is, I said. Get my body back, get some abs, make him see what he's missing, and definitely I'll get him back. And so began a week or two of heavy exercise wherein I worked out like my life depended on it. Not content to keep my workouts just in the gym, I decided to feed my ego and vanity further by coming up with a point system for my workouts and my diet. A day of weights was worth 6 points. Running a 5K was 3 points. A 10K was 6, and so on. Every processed fatty food I ate subtracted 1 point. The goal was to finish each day with 10 points. And for no reason other than I thought my muscles weren't very flexible, a full practice session of yoga was worth 8 points. I'm a cheap man, and when I discovered that anyone with a working knowledge of yoga poses can do yoga at home for free via iTunes, I immediately searched for the most intense, grueling yoga class iTunes had to offer and found something called Live, Love, Teach. The first class I did was called Forrest Gump Yogi. The teacher, Philip Urso, talks in the class about how what made Forrest Gump a beautiful and compelling character was Forrest's complete lack of ego. Yeah, I thought, and he was a complete idiot. I was ready to stretch my muscles, but not my limits. Nonetheless, the class felt amazing. It was a great mix of challenge and relaxation, and best of all, it was indisputably 8 points worth of work, furthering me toward the 10 points I needed daily as the rent I paid for having a body. So I started doing other episodes of the same yoga podcast. Soon the practice overtook the fitness program, and I set out to complete every single episode of the same podcast. I felt so good after every practice. The breath had allowed me to, for the first time, slow down enough that I could see that I was not my egomaniacal thoughts. I was more than a point system, or a lack of a boyfriend, or even a body. Then at the end of one of the podcasts, Philip, the instructor, said that he had a new podcast out about spirituality. It was called A Crash Course in Miracles. So I downloaded the first episode. I will never forget the first words of that podcast, which are from the Course. A cloud does not put out the sun. A voiceover would say these words repeatedly throughout the show. And then I started repeating these words to myself. A cloud does not put out the sun. My boyfriend left me because I'm an egomaniac. A cloud does not put out the sun. I don't have six-pack abs and the butt of a hip-hop artist. A cloud does not put out the sun. I don't know what I'm going to do next. A cloud does not put out the sun. I am fearful. I am angry. I don't know who I am. I cannot remember. A cloud does not put out the sun. I decided that I was going to get a copy of this book that they were talking about on the podcast. It was a little setback that none of the local bookstores had it. So I was on my way to a yoga studio that was closing at the end of the month, and they were giving away all their books for free to anyone who wanted it. I nearly squealed when I saw, in all its dark blue, 3-inch thick glory, a copy of A Course in Miracles. I took home the course and Gary Zhukov's The Seed of the Soul, which I still have never read. But opening the course became, like the yoga, an everyday practice. Soon I read Disappearance of the Universe by Gary Renard and Long Time No See by Carrie Triffitt. I saw that this was not a path reserved for swamis and hippies, but was for regular people like me who worked and cursed and drank and smoked weed and sometimes ate bad food and hated their ex-boyfriends for leaving them. You didn't need any advanced preparation, just a little bit of willingness to turn over your grievances. And I'd seen the results of what I was getting by the way I had tried things, so I decided that there had to be a better way. I decided that the way I was setting goals was backward. Instead of thinking that I was entitled to certain things in life and then getting mad when they weren't there, I decided I would set out to be the most loving, forgiving person possible and let everything else work itself out. By the time 2012 ended, I was ready to take on a deeper A Course in Miracles experience. So I journeyed through the workbook with the On Course workbook group, where Jean Bogart, who some listeners might recognize as the co-host of Gary Renard's podcast, was a great help in breaking down and applying course principles. The practice complemented yoga so well. You practice, even when it's difficult, you just keep breathing. And without too much strain, you get better at it just by practicing all the time. And it wasn't easy, but over time, I was able to forgive people and release unforgiveness that had been blocking me in so many ways. I forgave my father for dying. I forgave myself for being gay. I forgave my mother for mistakes she made. And I forgave my boyfriend for leaving, because who wants to be with an egomaniac anyway? Even I didn't want to be with me. So I changed me. One by one, I released them to the Holy Spirit. And with each one, I felt a little lighter inside. I wasn't carrying around a bunch of metaphysical weight from things that had happened years ago, and in some cases, never even happened at all, except for my freaking out, making it real. And day by day, I became a calmer, softer, lighter person, one whose smile is genuine and not a means to get approval, one who can empathize before he criticizes, one who sees the sun even when the sky is dark with clouds. Years later now, I am able to look back at all the pain and anxiety I used to perpetually live in, and I see that I not only caused it with all my thoughts, but also made it real by refusing to see my problems with any eyes other than the ego's. I still do yoga every day, but don't assign myself points for it. See the beauty in life rather than the separation, and constantly remind myself that no matter what, a cloud does not put out the sun. Thank you for the podcast, and thank you to all course friends everywhere who may be listening to it. None of us are ever healed alone. And thank you so much to the listener who took the time to open up and reveal himself and write this very honest and genuine assessment of himself and his situation and how A Course in Miracles really began to change that. So it's really beautiful. I loved reading it, and I hope you enjoyed listening to it as well. So if you have a story that you want to share, I would love to hear it, and I'm sure other course friends out there would love to hear it as well. So please write to me at acourseinwhat@gmail.com, and I'll leave that email again at the end of the podcast. And we would love to hear your story. So thank you so much. Okay, so let's continue reading where we left off. We are on chapter 3, The Innocent Perception, section 6, Judgment and the Authority Problem. And that is on page 48, paragraph 9 in the text. So the last few podcast episodes obviously are the paragraphs before paragraph 9, where we've gone into detail about the terms judgment and the authority problem. Basically, in a nutshell, the authority problem is the belief that we authored ourselves. Instead of being innocent children of God, as God is our one creator, we listen to the ego and believe that to be our authority. And hence, all problems stem from that authority problem. Okay, so let's continue. Paragraph 9, sentence 1. Only those who give over all desire to reject can know that their own rejection is impossible. So all desire to reject is all desire to reject their truth, their true identity. We reject that true identity all the time. So the ego's desire, as we've talked about, is to usurp God in our mind, to give us a new identity as a guilty, separated person stuck in this body. And only those who give over all desire to reject that truth can know that their own rejection is impossible. So once we give up identifying with the ego, we will then know that rejection in any form is impossible. Sort of a tongue twister or mind twister as you read through this. And that's why, actually, this is a great sentence to talk about how A Course in Miracles is really a course of study. And it takes time to read through these sentences. As I talked about in the last podcast episode, sometimes you have to read them over and over and over again to really understand them. And there's like double negatives, etc. So it's, I think, obviously Jesus did this on purpose for us to stop and to read these sentences very carefully. So again, once we give up identifying with the ego, we will then know that rejection in any form is impossible. How can there be rejection in oneness? There's only acceptance. God hasn't rejected us. We haven't truly rejected God, though by listening to the ego, we do turn our back on him. Sentence 2, you have not usurped the power of God, but you have lost it. Again, we can never leave God. We can only pretend. We can fall asleep to that truth that we are at one with God. We can be hypnotized, so to speak, by the ego to think we've separated. But in actuality, we've merely lost sight of reality. 3, fortunately, to lose something does not mean that it has gone. And this reminds me of stage hypnosis. You know, when someone is under hypnosis at one of those county stage fairs or whatever, or in Vegas, and that person thinks that he's dancing with a beautiful woman under hypnosis, when really he's just dancing with a broom, or that he's on a boat at sea, but he's just sitting on a chair on a stage in front of 100 people. He hasn't gone anywhere. He's not at sea. He's not really dancing with a beautiful woman. His mind has just been altered to believe that the untrue is true. And so it is with all of us. We've all been altered by the ego or hypnotized by the ego. 4, it merely means that you do not remember where it is. So let me read that previous sentence one more time. Fortunately, to lose something does not mean that it has gone. It merely means that you do not remember where it is. So just like that guy on stage, we too have forgotten who we are and our true reality. 5, its existence does not depend on your ability to identify it or even to place it. It's meaning God or a true identity. That does not depend on your ability to identify it. That still exists despite our hypnotized mind, despite our current sleep state. God is. 6, it is possible to look on reality without judgment and merely know that it is there. So here he's bringing the idea of judgment, the title of this section, Judgment and the Authority Problem, into this paragraph by saying that you can remember by not judging, by relinquishing judgment. And what does that mean? It means to look upon a situation and instead of judging, saying, I don't know what this is for. That's relinquishing your ego, and that's acceptance. Once you let go of the judgment by saying that or recognizing it, thinking it in your mind, there's an acceptance that naturally follows. And then you're guided correctly in the situation in terms of what to do behaviorally in the world. But once you think you know, that's all ego. So we can do this in situations that arise in our lives by saying to ourselves, I don't know what this is for. And that ultimately is a way for us to move closer to God. If you've done the workbook lessons, you may remember that workbook lesson number 1 is nothing I see means anything. The first lesson is about giving up judgment. We give up judgment about the people or situations in our lives. In fact, that first lesson starts us off just by looking at things close to us, giving up judgment about computers and glasses and tables and chairs. And then we extend our thinking farther and look out the window and give up our judgment about trees and cars or whatever. And then we keep extending that. So we give up our judgment about things and then people and then situations and then the world. And ultimately that helps us to break down that barrier of judgment to God. So all those little judgments are really the clouds that we are blowing away with that acceptance. And by saying that in our mind, relinquishing those little clouds. And again, as the listener had said, a cloud does not put out the sun. The sun is always shining. It's our job to choose to relinquish those judgments. And I think if we just start there, everything else will fall into place. We first have to have that little willingness to give up the judgment. Okay, so we'll stop there for today and we'll finish this section in the next podcast episode. So thank you for joining me today. And if you would like to stay in touch, again, you can email me at acourseinwhat@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook. We have a page just for this podcast at facebook.com/acourseinwhat. And I'm also on Facebook with my hypnotherapy page at facebook.com/Cynthia Morgan Hypnotherapy. And you can go to my website, cynthiamorgan.us, for more information. And if you would like to say the summary of A Course in Miracles with me, that would be great. Nothing real can be threatened. Nothing unreal exists. Herein lies the peace of God.